So, of course, we are here tonight to talk about CalTopo and a little quick history on it. CalTopo was designed by a guy involved with search and rescue to combine some tools and mapping information for different groups of people that work on search and rescue missions to share information and some handy tools that really go beyond mapping and add a lot of value for us as SOTA activators. It was started 2011, but quickly got popular with backcountry recreationists. And it's got great tools for planning, other trips, backpacking trips. And I can honestly say that I probably spend more time in CalTopo than I do on summits. And if you know the way I activate, that's kind of saying something. So CalTopo has several subscription levels, and basically most of what I'm going to show you is available in the free version. I will show you some of the other features in the other paid versions, and as you can see, they kind of add stuff on in each layer of subscriptions, and their little chart doesn't really do it quite justice, in my opinion. So some of the kind of pros and cons of the different subscription levels. Like I said, in the free version, you get most of the base layer maps and access to most of the tools, and you can save your maps. You can go to the website and look at stuff and draw routes, but you have to log in order to save it. And you can print out maps up to 8.5 by 11 and 11.5 normal letter size. Somebody might say one of the cons are that any map that you save is public, but we'll look at that later. This is not all trails or other kind of social mapping websites. When you save stuff, it's not that accessible. It's not like there's a list of hikes to, Mount Rogers or wherever. So, if you've got a map to your moonshine still or illegal gardening project, you probably want that to be private. But pretty much everything I've ever done is public. And you'll see that it's not that accessible, not this week, but in the next session. The big con is in the mobile app, which I think is a perfect extension or companion to the website. You can't download any offline base layers to the phone. You have to be online in order to have any maps in the background. Is that a big deal? Most of the time, not. And the gotcha is, if you want to look at the maps that you have downloaded to your phone needs to be offline anyway. So if you've got it, not in airplane mode, it's going to default to pulling maps off the internet anyway. So neither one of those, can I say, are truly cons. And then bumping up to the next level, $20 a year, you can download base layers to your phone, and you can have private maps. Doesn't really add a whole lot of value there. For $50 a year, you can see there's a huge chunk of stuff that you gain. You get the premium layers, which include parcel data, which is nice, but if you really were like trying to contact the owner, you're still going to have to look it up in the county tax records. But this makes it super easy for route planning and to see who the owners are and look it up in the tax maps. The tax maps are usually not great mapping systems in and of themselves. So this will give you at least a real easy way to identify the parcels. And you can look at that when you're looking at the app on your phone too. Live satellites, that's kind of, I don't know how much benefit it would have for us in the Southeast. Maybe for somebody out west where they're looking for snow cover and access to trailheads, that might give them up to date, up to the minute information on what ground conditions look like. It also gives you access to the Google map layers, the Google map, the satellite, the hybrid. But the key there is the Google satellite imagery is pretty much the highest resolution imagery that is available. And so that is very good to have. It also gives you access to some real-time data like weather, temperature, stuff like that. Something that's fairly new, which we'll talk about, that I think is pretty cool, especially if you're planning a little bit longer trip or multiple summits in a day, are travel plans, which actually give you, Tommy probably can relate to this, our buddy Pete, I guess from his military background, he would keep notes of how long it took him to like transit between summits. And, when we were planning another trip, he could say, yeah, the last time it took me 33 minutes to drive between the two trailheads, and 43 minutes to hike up, and, and the travel plans kind of give you that. And it's pretty cool. Another kind of cool gee whiz type thing is you can view the CalTopo layers in Google Earth, which is kind of cool. Normally in Google Earth, you're used to seeing kind of the satellite imagery, but when you can drop the Forest Service topo in there and actually see the topo map in 3D, it's pretty cool, but I don't know how much value that actually adds. You can actually export kind of maps that you have created, combination of base layers, to use on GPS units, not just to track. I don't use a GPS unit anymore, so that has no value for me. And you can print much larger prints and higher res. But can any of y'all print something that's 36 by 48 inches? Nobody's got a plotter. And so even if you do like printing out paper maps, that doesn't buy you a whole lot. And then you can also, this is kind of an edge case as well, that you can import a georeferenced image. Usually we're talking about like a map that you get from somewhere, state park or somewhere like that. But you'll see later on that a lot of that's already available in CalTopo. So for the pro version, you've got a whole list of stuff that looks well worth it, in my opinion. The $100 version, I honestly see no value in it. If you're in an RV and traveling across the country and camping way off the grid and want to plan something without internet access, the desktop version, which gives you offline access to all the base layers and the tools, that may have some value for you. But to jump from $50 to $100 to me seems crazy. Custom map builder layers, I can give you an example of that. My pro account is a legacy pro account, so I actually have that feature. And in my account, I've used it for one thing, and I actually use it all the time, but it's such a simple thing. It's certainly not worth another $50 a year. And then you can even make larger printouts. And you'll see when we talk about printing that it's not the amount of stuff you can print out, it's how much you can, how big a single page you can do. So that is not a real big thing. So I think the best value is the pro account. You can certainly get started with the $20 account. That's the most usable for most people. And then if you think you'll use the other tools, you know, for less than 1 cup of bad Starbucks coffee a month, you can bump up to the pro version. So let's see what else we got here. So quick thing, what we're going to do tonight is we've obviously already looked at subscription options, and we'll look at logging in, some basic settings that you probably should double check, where everything is laid out in CalTopo, the base layers that I think are the most useful, and then adding markers and lines, which is pretty much what we are going to be doing anytime, and saving your maps. And then homework, I don't know, we might give you some homework. So let's move over to CalTopo. Let me get y'all out of the way. So real brief at the top, I don't know if you call this a menu or not. The help will open up their support page. I find their documentation to be very easy and straightforward. So you can always refer back to this. It's, you know, pretty much laid out as you see stuff in CalTopo. They also have, you know, the forum that you could ask questions, and you're always welcome to ask me if you have a question about anything. One of the amazing things I think about all online mapping is the fact that you can just type in something, you know, the name of a mountain or a place, and it'll take you right there. Important things to look at. These are some default settings. I prefer not to show any labels when you draw a track or add a marker. You'll have them over here where you can see what they are, but then they kind of clutter up the interface, I think. UTM, US National Grid, you don't really need to bother with. That's probably something that's more search and rescue related. It's a different way. Instead of using lat long, you can, they can put up these grid squares, and for search and rescue, it's much easier because it's like the bottom left is a known coordinate, and you go up, you know, 4 miles and over 5 miles, it's easier to navigate. But I don't think that has any benefit for us. The default mode, at one point in time, they had 2 different kind of servers, one for search and rescue and one for recreation. I can't really tell the difference between them. I don't see any extra features, but obviously you want to be on recreation. The datum is very important. This has to do with how map coordinates are placed on a map. And the bottom line is World Geodetic System 84, that's 1984, is what your GPS units use. And so that is what you need in order. It seems crazy that you can take a lat long, and if it's not in WGS 84, it's going to be a different location than you were thinking. The only other option they have is NAD 27, which was created in 1927 and is very old. But sometimes if you were looking at a paper map, you might notice that it was in NAD 27. And so the only benefit there would be if you switch to NAD 27, you could enter the coordinates off of that map, see where it is on the map, and then switch back over to WGS 84. And then it would be kind of the modernized coordinates. So the next couple settings primarily have to do with this and a few other places. So this little informational window will give you the current coordinates of two options, and then a secondary coordinate system, which once again, that's more search and rescue, and as well as the current elevation of the point you're measuring and the datum. So you can choose whether you want mixed, meaning metric and imperial or freedom units. I don't know why. I guess if you were planning a river trip, you might choose nautical, but obviously mixed or metric is probably what most people would want. And these two have to do with the two coordinate systems that you see up here. Most people are probably going to choose decimal degrees, which that's what degrees are. And then you can almost ignore that secondary option there, unless you, for some reason, you want to use universal transverse Mercator, which I don't think you do. So the position option, this is interesting, and I've started playing around with this. Your two options are wherever the cursor is or the center of the screen. At the moment, it's on center, and you can see that there's a little crosshair in the center of the screen there. This is how it works on the mobile app. So when you're moving stuff around on the screen on the mobile app, it's always telling you the position of what's in the center of the screen. So if you wanted to know where Mount Hardy Gap was, you'd have to move it down there, and then it would give you the coordinates for where you're at. The other option, which I've always used up until now, is cursor. And obviously that just follows you around wherever you are on the screen. So those are the important things, is that you have the datum set to WGS 84 and what coordinates and units you want to use when you're mapping. Sorry. This basically will reset everything if you have drawn a line or if you had an open map and you wanted to kind of start with a clean slate. Sign up is basically just going to tell us that you need to log in. So we're going to bop over here. And when you log in, you have choices of all these other affiliated logins. You know, all of these have pretty secure login systems, and so CalTopo just piggybacks onto those. So I'll go ahead and log in. Not much changes there. So moving on to the rest of the interface, I like to think of this sidebar on the left-hand side of the screen as my stuff. The sidebar on the right-hand side is their stuff. And so on the left-hand side is where you will add stuff, lines and markers and other features to your maps. On the right is where you will choose maps and other features that are provided by CalTopo for your use. That's not 100% true, but that's an easy way to think about it. So over each sidebar, you can grab the little handle and make it bigger or smaller, or you can minimize it to give you more view of your maps. And I don't know when they added this, but I'm kind of a keyboard warrior, and they've added a lot of keyboard shortcuts. And so like the little hat symbol is geek for the control key. So like I can hit Control O to minimize that and Control L to close the layers, or vice versa. And then obviously the add button is where we will add stuff. And we'll come back to that later. Obviously we've got zoom controls. This right now doesn't tell us much. Basically it just gives us the current map URL. But once we save something, this little info icon will actually give us a little more information about the map itself that we've saved. The print, we'll go back and look at that at a later point. There's lots of options there. We'll also look at the measure tools later. If you're on a device that is location capable, you can always hit the locator in the bottom right, and it will take you to your current location. There are also down here on the bottom some keyboard shortcuts for navigating around the actual map viewer. So of course you can always use the cursor and move stuff around, or you can just use the arrow keys as well. So depends on how geeky you want to get there. So one of the huge benefits of CalTopo are not only the base layers, which a lot of mapping applications have, but how you can work with them. And so let's just take a quick look at what layers are available. And so the items with Map Builder in the name, those are kind of CalTopo's in-house map layers. And their data comes from a number of sources, U.S. Geological Survey, OpenStreetMaps, which if you're not familiar with that, that's a kind of a community sourced mapping system. And actually is probably the most up-to-date source of trail information and recreation-based information. And so a lot of the other layers make use of the OpenStreetMap data. The map builder layers also make use of pretty up-to-date LiDAR imagery, so some pretty high quality imagery, and also some data from this layer as well, the National Agricultural Inventory program. But I like to think of the map builder layer is really kind of a database, because you can actually break it apart, and that's one of those features that was in the desktop version, was you could actually pull out different pieces of information out of that layer. And so so I've got a layer here that I call counties, but technically all I did was I pulled the borders feature out of Map Builder Topo. And so it gives me just an easy way to see not only county boundaries on other maps, but it would also show me things like national forest and national park boundaries as well. Map Builder Topo is good because it scales very well. As you zoom out, it'll kind of clean itself up somewhat and not get too busy. And, you know, it gives you all the essentials. It gives you some, it gives you the contours. It gives you trail information. It gives you a lot of good recreation stuff, parking sites, spots, and campsites. And it also has some shaded relief to give you kind of that fake 3D look. I don't really use the hybrid. That's the one that adds some of the imagery from this layer to give you a little bit of a view what the lay of the land is visually. I don't get much benefit from that, and I'll show you how I get around that in a minute. Scan topos are everybody's favorite, the old USGS 7.5 minute 1 to 20,000 quads. They have great detail. They cover the entire US and Canada, but they're pretty out of date usually. Most of the USGS quads have not been updated in, 40, 50 years at best. But then again, that's not a bad thing, because a lot of times the features that we as SOTA activators are looking for, maybe old trails, old road beds, things like that. So there is some value there. But they don't scale very well. They get hard to read, and you can see that they're all done in differing shades of green, so it looks like a giant quilt. But there's still value there, like I said. The Forest Service quads are much more up to date, but they still may not be the latest in terms of the current state of trails and things like that. But they are pretty good at depicting things like the Forest Service roads, the ones that are open, the ones that are, gated and closed. So they do give you a lot of information. I don't know how this plays out west, where you may have more Bureau of Land Management land, if they're still considered useful. But you've got a couple choices under there as well. So you've got the 2016 versions, which gives you some of the vegetation overlay, or you can switch to what I think is a little bit cleaner map, the white map that doesn't have any vegetation overlay, or they even have an older version. So the one thing about maps, I would say, or one axiom of maps is, in some shape or form, they are all liars. They don't intend to be, but they are all victims of the technology and the data that was in place when they were created. And so any of these could be out of date, or just the information not exactly as good as you would like it, or not updated. That's one good thing about the stuff coming from OpenStreetMaps, is it gets updated fairly regularly. CalTopo pulls it in. Actually, CalTopo pulls data in usually several times a year from the different sources as available. The difference is, with OpenStreetMap data, you can actually go to the OpenStreetMap project and add or correct data, and eventually it may be accepted and added, and you'll see it in CalTopo. So another topo layer, and this is the one that I tend to use the most. I think it's the cleanest looking, the TF Outdoors. It has, pretty easy to distinguish trails. Once again, it has good information on parking lots, restrooms. That's always key for me. I like to know there's a toilet at the trailhead. And campsites. See if we can find some here. So yeah, there's a couple campsites they've got up on top of Mount Hardy. So it's a very nice layer. And you can see my slow internet. And so now getting down into some of the imagery, the global imagery, as you can imagine, is global. It's not the highest resolution. It's not near as high resolution as the Google satellite imagery, but it's still more than sufficient for getting a better idea of what you're going to encounter on the ground a lot of times. You can see, if it's an open area or forested or conditions along the road. It can, depending on the area, and you can see there, it changed to a different source of imagery, which can be handy because that obviously is a different season. And so even zooming in and out, you may get different results in a different season, may give you information that may be beneficial. And in a similar vein, the National Agriculture Inventory Project, it has a secondary options here where you can select from 2 different years. And that was kind of done intentionally so that they could, you could see things in a little bit different lighting conditions, maybe a different season. And, everything looks different, whether it's in the summertime or in the dead of winter. And so once again, the more information you have at your disposal, the better. So let me switch back over here. So I'm going to jump ahead for a second and choose the shaded relief layer. So the shaded relief layer is most often used to kind of give you that fake 3D look, which can kind of help you visualize how things are laid out. And there's a couple options under shaded relief. Now, the normal layer will act like any other base layer and completely block out the layer below it, which that will come into play in a later discussion. But most often it's used just to kind of give you that better 3D look. The enhanced and terrain features use a different technique where you can bump it up all the way up to 100%, and it will give you the 3D look, but it will still let you see the underlying features. And let me take one step back. So basically the shaded relief, the way it works is there's like a light source coming in from the north-northwest, 315 degrees at a certain angle, azimuth above the ground. And that's what gives you that shaded contours. Now, the enhanced layer does the same thing from the same angle. The terrain feature, one of the issues is if you were looking at this screen laying flat, if you were looking at it from the other side of the table from me, say, it wouldn't look as natural. And it might look kind of funky. And so this terrain version is supposed to, it gives a lighting source from many different directions so that you can, it all looks the same no matter which way you're looking from. But to me, it actually doesn't make it easier. But that may work for some people. So then you got a couple. So like I've got the Google layers. If you don't have a pro version, you won't even see these here. But of course, it's always nice to be able to look at Google Maps and figure out where you're at. They do have other street maps. Once again, Map Builder is CalTopo's version of a street map. Not very pretty. You know, other than maybe trying to, you know, if you're moving around at a larger scale and trying to figure out where you are, I don't know that that would have much benefit. OpenStreetMaps is the same thing. It just gives you a little bit. The cycle map, OpenCycleMap, does give you a topo map, but it's still, I think, is inferior to both the Map Builder Topo and TF Outdoors. So those are the map layers that I make use of. Some that are kind of cool to look at. You can look at the aeronautical ones, and they will give you the location of, you know, the navigational beacons and the frequencies and things like that. They have 2 layers of historical topo maps, which are pretty cool because sometimes you can, you know, you can see the old names of things, and they have 2 different vintages of maps there. Sorry, very thirsty. Any questions so far? So one of the
Yeah,
best
this is Paul.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Pat. One of the do you ever use the slope angle shading map overlay? I use that. I started using it about a year ago, and because a lot of the summits out here have no trails to the top,
Right.
but we do a lot of bushwhacking, and the slope angle shading is really helpful when you're trying to determine the best route to the top. And I wonder if you've used that yourself at all, and if not, um, take a look at it sometime and see what you think. I don't know if most of your summits there have trails or not.
No, most definitely not. And I will talk about slope angle shading. And I guess I should have said earlier on. So we're going to delve into kind of the lower half of the right side bar in the next session. And so we're going to concentrate up here tonight. And then, because yeah, this is where some of the cooler stuff is, in my opinion, that is very beneficial to planning activations. And so, yeah, we will definitely look at slope angle shading and even some other ways to take advantage of that. So we will most definitely cover that.
Hey,
So,
Pat,
yep.
I had a question. Towards the beginning, your map, you were able to show between like the different public lands, like where one park was versus another. Was that an add-in, or is that
No, I think what you were maybe let me zoom back in.
like it showed Mount Pisgah Forest and then it showed Blue Ridge Parkway?
Right. And that
Yeah.
was a function of the map builder topo, I
Okay.
think. Maybe not.
There-
Maybe it's cleaner now.
It's the public land selection.
Well, that's another thing which
Okay.
I haven't touched on yet. And that's what we'll add that next time. But yeah, this gives us, you can see here that that's Blue Ridge Parkway. And this tells you that's Pisgah National Forest and Nantahala over here.
Okay.
So that's just one. Oh, I know what it was. Did I turn that on? Maybe I turned that on, which was my counties thing that I created. And so, yeah, that tells me that that's Middle Prong Wilderness. And if we passed over here, it would tell us we were in Shining Rock. So yeah, we'll dive into some of that in the next class. And so, like I said, we're really just trying to cover the very basics of navigating and adding a few objects. So one of the benefits, in my opinion, of CalTopo over other mapping systems that are available on the internet is you can stack base layers in a lot of systems, but it's all or nothing. And so, like, I'm going to add the global imagery. And then I'm going to add the shaded relief. And the big difference with CalTopo, and I may be wrong, I took another look at Gaia recently, and I don't think they have this feature, is you can change the transparency of each layer that you stack. And it's kind of in reverse order. Whatever's at the top is like the bottom layer. This one's on top, that one's on above all of them. And so you can kind of create your own custom views where like, you know, you're adding in the imagery there. And then once again, I can add kind of that fake 3D on top of that. And to be honest, I don't necessarily use it in that manner all the time. But what I do is it makes it very easy to say like, oh, what's right there? And I can kind of zoom around and see the differences. But I think that ability to blend and, you know, kind of create your own view is very unique with CalTopo. So let's go over some of the basics of adding stuff to a map. So we'll close up this guy and we'll open the left sidebar. So tonight, all we're going to look at is adding a marker or a line, and then we'll work on some of the others in the future. Obviously, a marker is the most basic one, and notice that there's a keyboard shortcut for that and adding a line. So, you know, a marker is just like a waypoint. And by default, when you click the add over here, it's going to put it in the center of your map. And down here, we've got like the little details of what the marker is going to be. And you can give it a name. And you could give it a comment. That will come into play at a later time. We will talk about folders next time. Obviously, you can make some basic changes in the size and the style. There is a way to import other ones here. Well, let's say we're going to add a campsite. And you can change the color. Now, while you have this little window open, you can move this. And so like, I just happen to know that on this trail, there's a great campsite over there. So while you have the edit window open, you can move that marker around. Another option is if you right click on the map and choose to add a marker, it will put it right there. And so I'll often, now let's take a quick segue and talk about saving maps. Anytime you add data, an object to a map, it's going to ask you to save it. You don't have to. You can do it later. But I'll go ahead and give it a name. And down here, you can see the options that you have. You can make it private if you have a $20 subscription, the basic or a pro or higher. Basically, I always just use this. I can give anybody the URL and they can look at it. You can also make it public, which is a criteria for the free account, which will make this one public just for grins. And like I was saying before, once you save a map, now this information icon tells you a little bit more. Pretty much the same thing that we looked at just a minute when saving the map. But it also gives us the URL for the map. So if I wanted to give that, send that to one of y'all, I could hit the little copy icon and that would put it on the clipboard, and I could paste that into an email or a text message. If I wanted to share it with you where you could actually add or edit stuff to the file, you know, I could give you write permission, and it would give us a different URL. And then you would have the ability to add information to the map. So, and now that we have saved the map, yeah, that's not a good example. But this is, you now have this little window up here, which I would call this the map extents button. And so what this would do would automatically scale to any saved information in your map. Right now, all we've got is that little campsite, but let me just add a quick line to show you what I mean. So say I was zoomed out way far away. If I click on that button, it's going to zoom in to the contents that I've created over here. Now, if I've added another line over here and I zoom in, once again, it's going to scale to where all of my stuff is in the screen. And so that's a very handy way to kind of reset and get your bearings straight. So we use this in the last class, and it's a good example. So when you go to add a line, you can click on the add, you can click on the map, right click on the map and choose add a line. But we'll go up here and add a line. You'll get this little pop-up up here, the snap to. And by default, it'll go to the OpenStreetMap data. And like I said, the OpenStreetMap stuff is generally the most up-to-date information out there. And so you can see that it gave me little yellow highlights on the trails and on the roads and things like that. And what this allows you to do is select one of those and then not have to like do individual dots. That you can, once you've selected a line, then you can, you know, go further down the segment and it will automatically fill in. But you have options. You can choose none if you didn't want to use any of them at all and just wanted to do them freehand. U.S. Forest Service would highlight all the lines that exist on the Forest Service maps. Obviously, there was a lot of similarity with the OpenStreetMap, but what some of us know is this line on the U.S. Forest Service map, that is not based in reality. That has not existed in, you know, probably 50, 60, 70 years, if that. So it's just a different way, but sometimes the lines that are available on the Forest Service map are not considered a trail and may not be in the OpenStreetMap data set. So it's still a good option. The other options don't make a whole lot of sense. MVUM is motor vehicle use maps, which we'll talk about tomorrow in more depth. Hydrological, you know, so, you know, I guess if you are navigating rivers, it will pick out water features, but I don't think that as much application for us. Lines is kind of interesting in that I would say I use this most often when I've drawn a route that is kind of a bushwhack. So like say I wanted to go up to this little peak up here, and so I could hand draw a line over there. And then, whoops, there we go. And then if I was to add another line, and it would actually use, basically what that is saying is use data that you've created and added over here as the source of the snap too. So I could go there and say, oh, I'm going to go there and cut off. And then if I go back and highlight it, you know, it's still on the line, and then it will snap to that line. But most often you're going to stick with the OpenStreetMap data. So we will take a look at this in more detail now. So I can say I want a line, and wow, lo and behold, it's broken my tutorial. When we did this a few years ago, this little segment of the trail was missing and we had to hand draw it in. But I can click here and you can see it will follow that line, and I can go all the way over here to the top of Mount Hardy and it will pick the most logical route. Now, I will make one recommendation. When you're drawing a line, you can double click to end a line, but I recommend either hitting the OK button or the little check box. A lot of times when you double click, you'll end up with a little funky tail that sticks out because you moved a very slight amount. So doing this is cleaner. You can undo steps that you've made. So like say I went there and then, oops, and it's handy when you make a mistake. And so then you can back up to the last step or the step before if you want to make a change. So once again, you kind of have to tell it you want to be on a line, and then follow it over. So once you have a line on the map, you can take a look at it. And this is where the mixed units will come in that are from your settings. And you can look at the profile, which will give you the basics, the distance, starting elevation, ending elevation, the gross elevation change and loss. And then you can also move your cursor along the line to see where stuff is. Now, another feature, if you hit expand, it'll give you even more information, some of it beneficial. This kind of tries to give you an indication of the variety of terrain, how steep your hike will be. And so you can see here that nothing really exceeds 30 degrees. And most of it is probably no greater than, 35% of the hike is at a 15-degree slope or less. It also gives you some idea of the land cover. And we looked at this last time, that as you come around, so this is a land cover on the here, that it kind of comes out in the open. And if we switch to an imagery layer, we can see that, sure enough, around 1.25 miles, 1.3 miles, you come out into that open area. And so that information is pretty accurate usually, and kind of handy. Anything else in there? Don't really make use of the aspect that has to do more with like where the trail, what direction the trail is facing. So another thing that they've added recently is travel time. And this is related to the travel plan feature that's available in the Pro version. And this is an attempt to give you an idea based on the type of trail, how long it will take you to hike it. Obviously, everybody moves at different speeds, both up and down. And so I don't know how beneficial this will be to most people. In the Pro version, with a travel plan, you can actually tweak the values. It's using something called the Munter method, which was developed by a Swiss guide, who obviously is probably a lot more fit than I am. But it has to do with the amount of elevation over distance. And you can, with the travel plan, you can actually figure out the units that you need to use. And so like the up units are pretty good for my hiking, and so like they say, we'll look at that in more detail, but like I'm up is 4 by default and down is 6. Well, I'm pretty slow coming down, and so my down should be the same as my up. So I would do a 4 or maybe even a 3 sometimes. And then it also, once again, you can set those in the travel plan for the different types of terrain. Obviously in the Southeast, we don't really need to worry about skiing times at all. So, but that's a handy little thing to play with. We can choose to modify a line, and you can do a lot of basic stuff, extend, split. One thing that I do a lot of times is like looking at the profile. We can see, let me pull that back up again. We can see that the hike is pretty much flat up until we get to this point. And that's where the climb really starts. So let's say I want to know really what's the elevation gain in that section. So I'll click there and tell it that I want to split that line. And so now I can look at that segment and look at the profile kind of in detail and see that, okay, in just over a mile, it's going to gain 600 feet. So it looks like a pretty steady climb. That's not very steep, but you know, it is a little bit of elevation change. So now I want to put those two back together. Well, if I click on that one and say that I want to join it to another line, I've got a problem. The line that I want to join it with has to have a name because it can't find what the other line is. So I can click on that and I'll go to edit, and that way I can edit its basic properties, and I will give it a name. Now, when I choose to join it back up, I've got the option. Yes, I want to join it to that line segment. And so now it's back in one chunk. So I will add another line over here. And so I can see that there's a trail that comes in somewhere over here, but the question is where do you park? And so this is where adding the global imagery layer back in, I can see there that the trail comes out of the woods somewhere over in here. But hey, that looks like a parking lot. And so I will go ahead and start my line from there. And as I zoom out, I can see that the trail, oh, it actually cuts into the woods here. And so I can go there. And all the way over to the summit. And so now I've got two routes that we can use to get to Mount Hardy. That one's a little bit longer. It's more or less a steady climb the whole way. But I happen to know that it's a very nice hike and there's a nice waterfall in there. And just for grins, we'll go all the way down here and we'll add another line. Starting here, we'll go up. Before SOTA, I used to do radio from Green Knob, and I really wish it was a SOTA summit, but unfortunately, Mount Hardy is the real summit. So now we've got an even longer hike. And oh boy, it climbs 942 feet in the first 0.6 of a mile. I don't think I'm going to go that way. We'll leave that one for another day. So another thing when about lines, if you need to, when you click on edit, notice that it gives you a lot of vertices along the line. And you have some that are solid and then some that are kind of transparent. And so if I move one of the solid ones, it will move the line segment. And you can make adjustments. If you move one of the intermediates, it actually will create two more intermediate vertices. And so if you really need to change the way things look, you can choose to use the intermediaries. If it would let me. And I guess we should say you have some of the same options. You know, you can change the line style, the color. What I do a lot of times, let's back out of here, just to make things a little bit easier. So I'll leave that one red. A lot of times I will alternate. A lot of colors don't show up well on maps. So I tend to stick with the red and the blue. And, you know, like I may change the style on that one just to distinguish it a little bit. So have I lost anybody?
No, good stuff. Enjoying it.
Yeah, that, you know, this is pretty much what I wanted to cover. Like I said, this is very basic and kind of into the minutia of, you know, the very simple stuff in CalTopo. But this is the type of thing that you'll use every time you're in CalTopo. I could add one more. We know that there's a trail, an unofficial trail. This would be something good to add to the OpenStreetMap data, that it kind of comes in and goes around here. Another thing, a little handy thing is if you are drawing freehand, normally it's like click, 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 freehand, or, you know, point to point. If you hold down the shift key, then you can kind of draw freehand. And so we know that it goes up, and then I just happen to know that it joins up right where the main trail makes that little zigzag. This is not the way that trail looks at all, but you can draw stuff freehand as well. And, you know, like you were saying, Paul, a lot of your stuff is bushwhacks. By and large, our stuff here has trails most of the way, and the majority of our off-trail hikes are what I refer to as up and done. And so there is a fair amount of off-trail hiking, but it's basically like, oh, I need to get up to the top of the hill now. And so they're fairly easy to navigate, but we do have some that are a little bit longer, and taking a little better look at the lay of land is important for those. So that's all I've got for you.
Yeah, Pat, when you were, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, when you were talking about the different maps, one thing that really turned me on with CalTopo was all the different maps. And back when it was free, before they had any paid versions, I really liked the high resolution Google satellite, but now it's only available in the pro version, so that's why I have the pro version. But like, if there's a summit that I'm going to that involves a lot of bushwhacking, I'll look at every single one of those maps and try to figure out, was there an existing trail at one point? Is there some old road that may have existed 100 years ago? And then I'll draw my own, you know, map and save it off to my GPS device and follow that, you know, because there may be certain segments on one that I'll pick and certain segments on another map and just piece that all together.
Yeah, and that will be kind of one of my most favorite tricks we'll share hopefully next week, which is finding man-made features that are not on maps.
Yeah.
Like most people here in the Southeast know, we utilize, old logging roads, old roads that, old Forest Service roads that are not in use anymore. And finding those is the key. Sometimes finding them is not a good thing, but
yeah, exactly. Yep. Yep. And I've used different satellite imagery to figure out, because sometimes it shows the winter view and sometimes it shows summer view. And the winter view is good because you can see where the rhododendron is and Mount Laurel, and kind of avoid that too when you're bushwhacking.
Yep, that is important. And somebody's doing the dishes, it sounds like.
Sorry about that.
Quite
Pat,
all right.
I'm a relatively new activator, and I've used CalTopo for quite a while for hiking, but I'm curious, is there an easy way to calculate like an activation zone?
We will do that. That's one of the things that hopefully we'll do in the next session. If not, that's definitely something I make use of.
Excellent.
So, yeah, I used to teach it a different. Well, I mean, I still use the same way to delineate it, but then I do add a different object for use in the field. It'll make sense when I show you.
Okay, looking forward to it. Thanks for doing this.
Oh, you're welcome. I mean, I absolutely love CalTopo, so I'm glad to share it with y'all. Anybody want homework?
No, I just finished 4 days of work. I don't want any homework. But excellent presentation. I even learned something. So
yeah, me too. Thank you.
So this is another selling feature, in my opinion, I keep telling people, I learn new stuff all the time in CalTopo. I showed Ryan something this weekend in the app that I'll show you when we talk about the app that is super, super handy. And this is kind of the corollary to it in the web interface. So I've got the map kind of centered here on the Mount Hardy Gap. Now, this is, once again, a pro level feature, but if I haven't sold you already, I was just poking around the interface and never really paid attention to the Google logo down here. So I just clicked on it this weekend. And, more or less it's, giving me Google Maps to where I can find the directions to the trailhead right there, which I think is super handy. But it's even handier in the mobile app, which I'll show you later. And I have started to use that almost on every activation. So what do the guys out west say? Do y'all have, does the Forest Service, do you have BLM land out where you're at?
Yep.
And do the Forest Service maps cover that area?
Actually, the map builder topo map covers that pretty well, I think.
Sure. Okay. But I mean, it would make sense that the Forest Service maps wouldn't cover it. That's one thing I didn't mention about the Forest Service maps is like the USGS quads, they cover the entire US and Canada. but the Forest Service obviously is not concerned where there's no Forest Service land. And so they don't provide coverage everywhere. But I didn't know if there was a similar BLM map.
Not that I'm aware of right now.
Yep.
Never paid attention.
So I hope y'all found some use in this and can make use of CalTopo a little more.
Very much so. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Very good. Thanks, Pat.
Thanks, Pat.
Definitely.
Pat.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Pat.
very good.
Thanks,
Bye,
Pat.
Lord.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Pat.
Pat.
Appreciate it.
Presentation.
Thank you, Pat.
Yep, you are welcome. And I'm going to stop the recording, but if anybody else has anything to say or ask?
Recordings be posted.